What if one of history's most iconic figures was the greatest hoax? Official chronicles tell us of Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who ruled England for 45 years. But what if the truth, hidden beneath her white lead and tight corsets, has the power to rewrite history as we know it? In this historical investigation, we delve into the Tudor dynasty's darkest secret. We'll uncover the forbidden notes of doctors, the encrypted diaries of courtiers, and the testimonies of eyewitnesses forced to remain silent under penalty of death. Discover the shocking truth about what was discovered after Elizabeth's death. A discovery so horrific that it was sealed in a lead coffin and hidden for over 400 years. In the pre-dawn darkness of March 24, 1603, three figures huddled over a lifeless body at Richmond Palace. They swore an oath of absolute secrecy about what they were about to discover. As they began to remove the elaborate gown that had defined Elizabeth I for nearly half a century, they uncovered a truth so horrific that it would be buried with the Virgin Queen, sealed behind lead and lies for more than 400 years. What lay beneath the white makeup and bejeweled gowns was not simply the body of an elderly monarch, ravaged by time and poison. It was evidence of something that challenged the very foundations of the Tudor dynasty's legitimacy, the authority of Protestantism, and perhaps even the nature of the person who ruled England for 45 years. The official story of Elizabeth's death speaks of a peaceful passing after a brief illness, a glorious reign concluded with dignity. But fragments of suppressed evidence, encrypted letters, and documents that escaped destruction tell a very different story. They speak of a body so decomposed by decades of lead poisoning that the flesh had blackened and peeled away in chunks. They describe anatomical anomalies that defied medical explanations of the time. They whisper of discoveries so disturbing that those who witnessed them were immediately separated, silenced under threat of execution, and in one case simply vanished from the historical record. This story begins not in 1603, but decades of trauma, when the young princess learned that survival at the Tudor court required transformation. Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed when Elizabeth was not yet 3 years old, beheaded on charges almost certainly trumped up by a king desperate for a male heir. This early trauma taught Elizabeth a cruel lesson. The female body was simultaneously a source of power and terrible vulnerability. She watched her father trade wives like playing cards, discarding or destroying them when they failed to produce sons. She witnessed her sister Mary's false pregnancies and the cruel ridicule they provoked. These experiences shaped Elizabeth's decision to transform her body into more than just flesh, into a political symbol, clad in lead paint and whalebone. By the time she ascended the throne in 1558, Elizabeth had already begun the physical transformation that would define and ultimately destroy her. The white lead paint, known as Venetian white, was applied daily in such thick layers that observers remarked that her face looked like a mask. This wasn't just vanity, it was political theater. The pale complexion symbolized virginity, purity, and, by extension, the unblemished Protestant virtue of England, standing in opposition to Catholic Europe. But the lead seeped through her skin, accumulating in her bones and organs, causing a slow poisoning that manifested itself in increasingly horrific ways. The corsets Elizabeth wore were extreme even by Tudor standards. Reinforced with whalebone, steel, and sometimes wood, they were laced so tightly that servants had to brace their feet against the queen's back to achieve the desired silhouette. The pressure at certain points exceeded 80 pounds per square inch, enough to break ribs, displace organs, and permanently deform the skeleton over decades. Elizabeth wore these devices for up to 16 hours a day for over 40 years. Medical analysis of surviving similar garments shows that they would have compressed the lungs, displaced the liver, and caused chronic oxygen deprivation, affecting every system of the body. Elizabeth's image of virginity served several purposes. Politically, it allowed her to remain unmarried and maintain power, which would have automatically passed to her husband. But there may have been deeper reasons. In her 20s and 30s, when the pressure to marry was most intense, Elizabeth spoke of an obstacle that made marriage impossible. Contemporaries speculated about everything from childhood trauma to physical deformity. The truth, hidden beneath layers of clothing and makeup, would only be revealed after her death. This enigma, ruling with an iron fist, created an aura of divinity around herself, but the price of this aura was unbearable. Every layer of whitewash was another brick in the wall she erected between herself and the world, between herself and her own humanity. She transformed herself into an icon, unaware that the materials that created her divine image were a deadly poison, slowly destroying her from within. And the longer she reigned, the thicker the layer of lies became, and the more terrifying the truth hidden beneath. The mystery is only just beginning to unravel. We've only scratched the surface of the abyss that became the Queen's life and death. If you want to know the price she paid for her crown and what hid behind the mask of grandeur, subscribe to our channel, and in the comments, tell us what you think was the very obstacle Elizabeth spoke of. Was it a political ploy or something far more personal and dark? Over the years, the cost of Elizabeth's toxic beauty regime became increasingly clear. The illusion of eternal youth she so carefully crafted began to crack, revealing the terrifying reality beneath. Lead makeup, intended to symbolize purity, eroded her skin, leaving deep pock marks and patches of blue-black discoloration. Her teeth blackened and fell out, a classic sign of lead poisoning, forcing her to cover her mouth while speaking, turning royal conversation into a gesture of secrecy. Her hair thinned and fell out in clumps, requiring increasingly elaborate and heavy wigs to conceal her receding mane. Beneath her magnificent gowns, symbols of her power and wealth, her skin became covered in oozing sores that refused to heal. They constantly became infected due to the toxic dyes in her clothes and the relentless pressure of her corsets. The irony was devastating. The very substances that were supposed to preserve her image of eternal youth were destroying her from the inside out. The mercury-based cosmetics used to treat her skin blemishes were causing neurological damage, slowly poisoning her mind. The belladonna drops that made her eyes appear larger and brighter gradually destroyed her vision. She found herself trapped in a toxic cycle. She needed ever more makeup to cover the damage the makeup itself had done. Each layer added to the poison accumulating in her system. By the 10th century, Elizabeth's public appearances had become elaborate theatrical productions. She would spend up to 4 hours being dressed, made up, and wigged. Courtiers were kept at a carefully calculated distance, close enough to be impressed by the overall effect, but not close enough to discern the deception. She refused to look in mirrors, ordering them removed from her chambers. The Virgin Queen became a character Elizabeth played, while the real woman was buried under layers of fabric, lead, and deception. The carefully worded notes of court physicians paint a picture of a woman in constant physical suffering. They describe treatments for mysterious swellings, the use of leeches, and the regular prescription of laxatives to purify the blood. One physician, writing in Latin in his personal diary, described how in 1592, while treating an abscess on her chest, he discovered a natural abnormality contrary to God's design. He noted that the tissues showed signs of an unnatural configuration and observed that the Queen's body seemed to possess characteristics of both Adam and Eve. This cryptic comment, hidden in an obscure document, was an unsettling premonition of what would be discovered after her death. What exactly did this physician see? Was it simply the result of illness, or did he discern something more fundamental? Something that explained her lifelong refusal to marry? This entry, full of fear and bewilderment, became one of the first clues to the secret Elizabeth so desperately guarded. She lived in a gilded cage, where every glance was an assessment, and every movement part of a performance. Her body became her prison, and the means by which she attempted to adorn it became an instrument of torture. She was the most powerful woman in the world, yet she was powerless against the slow decay taking place within her own flesh. This contrast between her outward grandeur and inner decay is key to understanding not only her personal tragedy but also the scale of the deception perpetrated at the highest levels of the English state. The last decade of Elizabeth's life marked a dramatic acceleration of her decline. The mask she had worn for so long began to crumble, revealing the horror lurking beneath. After a severe illness in 1593, she began to suffer attacks during which she forgot where she was and spoke to people who were not in the room, including her long-dead mother. These episodes, likely symptoms of lead encephalopathy, were carefully concealed from the public. The Privy Council developed a system of using doubles for public appearances when the Queen was unable to appear. Dressed from a distance in the Queen's costumes, these stand-ins maintained the illusion of a royal presence while the real Elizabeth struggled with the demons in her mind. By 1599, Elizabeth had developed what doctors described as a massive abdominal swelling, possibly a tumor or a severe displacement of organs due to her corset. New dresses with hidden panels had to be created to accommodate her changing shape while maintaining her iconic silhouette. Toxic cosmetics transform her face into something barely human. A Venetian diplomat who briefly caught a glimpse of her without makeup described being so shocked that he had nightmares for weeks. He described her face as covered in deep furrows and pits, and her complexion as blue-gray, like a corpse. The year 1602 brought new horrors. Elizabeth suffered what appeared to be a series of strokes. Her speech became slurred. She developed weakness on the left side of her body. And, most humiliating of all, she began to lose control of her bodily functions. Special garments were designed to conceal these episodes. She was dressed, made up, and paraded for public performances like a puppet, with assistants ready to support her if she began to fall. By the winter of 1602 to 1603, Elizabeth was essentially a living corpse. She developed what doctors called putrefactive ulcers on her legs, which emitted such a foul odor that servants constantly burned herbs to make the royal chambers tolerable. These ulcers became gangrenous. Her flesh literally rotted while she was still alive. Strange growths, described as barnacle-like, appeared on her body, possibly tumors or a severe reaction to decades of toxic exposure. In her final months, Elizabeth's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would stand for hours in one position, claiming that if she sat or lay down, death would take her. She refused food, as painful ulcers in her throat made swallowing excruciating. When she did eat, she immediately vomited blood and what doctors called black bile. Her weight plummeted, and beneath her padded clothing, her body became skeletal. The most closely guarded secret of these final weeks was the discovery of what doctors called, in coded Latin, the monstrum in corpore, a monster in the body. A growth near her left breast, the size of a condensed egg, was purple-black, with visible veins that pulsated independently. When it was opened, black blood with a metallic odor flowed from it. Some suspected cancer, others a parasitic growth. Most alarming were the reports that it contained something resembling hair and teeth, pointing to teratoma. This horrific growth was more than just a disease. It seemed alien, an ominous omen of what lurked deeper within this ravaged body. With each passing day, the illusion of the Queen as a goddess crumbled, and the courtiers watched in horror as their immortal monarch transformed into something unimaginable. March 23, 1603, brought the final crisis. Elizabeth suffered a powerful seizure that lasted nearly an hour. Foam and blood oozed from her mouth. When it was over, she lay so still that many thought she had died. Then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, she whispered to Robert Cecil, "There's an iron chain around my neck. Everything has changed for me." The Queen's final hours remain shrouded in mystery. Some accounts describe her body contorting into impossible positions. Others speak of strange sounds emanating from within her. Dr. Richard Manningham, who was present at her death, later wrote, "The skin seemed to move of its own accord, as if creatures were crawling beneath it." When death finally came, it was not the peaceful passing of a Christian soul, but the violent expulsion of something desperately clinging to life. Death was recorded at 3 a.m. on March 24, 1603. What happened immediately afterward will become one of the most closely guarded secrets in history. The body was wrapped in a shroud before rigor mortis had set in. It was immediately placed in a lead coffin and sealed. No death mask was made, no viewing was permitted. Witnesses were sworn to silence under threat of execution. The preparation of the body was carried out by just 3 people, Dr. Manningham, Lady Helena Schneickenberg, and an unnamed priest. What they discovered beneath layers of clothing and cosmetics required one of the most extensive cover-ups in history. Removal of the royal robes revealed that the fabric had become stuck to the skin due to dried blood and pus. The corset had grown into her flesh. Whalebone bones had dug into her ribs. When removed, it tore off chunks of necrotic tissue. The shape of her ribcage was permanently deformed by the tight lacing. The lower ribs were compressed inward and upward, displacing her internal organs. Her liver was pushed into the chest cavity. Her stomach had shrunk to a normal-sized lobe. The organs themselves were described as blackened and shrunken, showing severe damage from decades of lead poisoning. Removing the famous white makeup revealed skin covered in a network of black veins forming intricate patterns. Where the lead had eaten deepest, there were holes right down to the bone. Her skull showed severe deformity from lead poisoning, with areas of bone softened and twisted. Most disturbing was a soft spot on the top of her head, similar to a baby's fontanelle, which pulsated within its own rhythm. Each new layer they peeled away revealed a deeper level of horror. This was not the queen's body, but an anatomical nightmare, a map of decades of suffering, poison, and deformity. The three witnesses stood in silence. Their world was crumbling. They were looking not at the remains of a monarch, but at evidence that their entire reality, the entire foundation of their nation, had been built on a monstrous lie. And that was only the beginning. The most shocking discovery lay ahead. An examination of the lower body revealed a secret that might explain Elizabeth's lifelong virginity and her refusal to marry. The witnesses, their hands trembling in the candlelight, described genitals that were neither fully male nor fully female, but some horrific fusion of both. The external genitalia were ambiguous, potentially indicating a disorder of sexual development. The vaginal opening, if it existed, was sealed with very old scar tissue. The uterus was wrinkled like a dried plum, with strange calcifications all over its surface. This discovery immediately called Elizabeth's entire identity into question. This was why she had never married. This was the obstacle she had mentioned. Or was it proof that the man who had ruled England for 45 years was neither fully man nor fully woman? The implications were staggering. Every law passed, every title of nobility created, every decision made could be challenged if the Queen did not conform to the rigid gender categories of Tudor society. Dr. Mingham described finding impossible anatomies, organs that shouldn't exist, connective tissues that defied medical understanding. He found what appeared to be a second, smaller heart near the stomach, lung tissue in the abdomen, and bones where they shouldn't be. The brain, examined through a small incision, showed extensive lead damage and contained small, hard nodules that when cut open, they looked like tiny pearls or eggs. The blood drained from the body was not deep red, but a viscous black substance with a metallic sheen, the consistency of tar, smelling of rotting metal. When it touched silver instruments, they immediately tarnished. Some of it seemed to move on its own, crawling across the table before coming to rest. Examination of the spine revealed severe scoliosis, compressed vertebrae from the corset, and bony growths protruding from the vertebrae, resembling small horns. The skin over these growths was thick and scaly, almost reptilian. These findings painted a picture of a creature that had transcended or fallen below normal human physiology. The three witnesses faced an impossible decision. Revealing their findings would destroy the legitimacy of the Protestant succession, potentially trigger a civil war, and give Catholic enemies were fed propaganda proving that the Protestant queen was cursed by God. A decision was made to cover everything up. The body was wrapped in several layers of shroud, placed in a lead coffin, immediately sealed, then placed in another coffin sealed with lead and mercury, bound with chains, and marked with religious symbols. Witnesses were separated. They were forbidden to meet or correspond. Manningham was sent to Scotland under an assumed name. Sneckenborg entered a monastery with a vow of silence. The priest simply disappeared. Everything that touched the body was burned. The examining table was destroyed. Even the floor where the Queen's blood had fallen was replaced. Every physical trace was eliminated. The expungement of records was systematic. Doctors' notes disappeared. Reports from ladies-in-waiting were confiscated and destroyed. Private letters mentioning the Queen's health were seized. Official: the story has been purged. A peaceful death after a short illness, showing only the normal signs of aging. The story you know is a carefully constructed illusion. The truth was buried, but its whispers reach us through the centuries. If you dare to hear these whispers and want to know how this deception shaped our world, be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe that the government is still capable of hiding secrets of such magnitude? And what historical truths do you question? The success of the cover-up was astonishing. For more than 4 centuries, the truth about Elizabeth's body remained hidden. The few who knew took their secrets to the grave. Documents were destroyed, witnesses silenced, and a censored version of history was written. The Virgin Queen became a symbol of English greatness. Her image was carefully crafted to inspire, not horrify. But fragments of the truth survived. The encrypted diary of a Lady Sneckenborg, deciphered only in the 20th century, suggests that she saw not the body of our late Queen, but something that wore her appearance as a disguise. Dr. Manningham's medical writings allude to conditions that should not be possible in God's creation. An unnamed priest left only a cryptic note in his Bible: "I have seen evidence that the devil can wear a crown." May God forgive us for what we have hidden. Elizabeth's own famous statement, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and courage of a king," takes on an entirely different, more literal meaning in light of these discoveries. And her refusal to allow doctors to examine her below the neck speaks more of a person protecting a dangerous secret than simple modesty. Modern medical tests suggest several possibilities. Severe poisoning with the crown and mercury could have caused mutations. A chromosomal disorder affecting sexual development, such as complete chromosome insensitivity syndrome, could explain the ambiguous genitalia. Or perhaps it was a teratoma, a tumor that grew throughout her life, creating impossible anatomies. The sealed tomb in Westminster Abbey has never been opened for modern study, despite numerous requests from historians and scientists. The British government has consistently refused, citing respect for the cuspids and the preservation of historical monuments. But many suspect the real reason is fear of what might be discovered. Recent non-invasive studies using ground-penetrating radar have revealed anomalies in the tomb's construction, multiple layers of lead, unusual voids, and metallic signatures suggesting chains or additional barriers. These findings are consistent with reports of extraordinary measures taken to seal the body. The mystery deepens with examination of her relationships and observations of contemporaries. Foreign ambassadors often commented on her unusually tall stature, broad shoulders, deep voice, and masculine features. Manners, the Spanish ambassador, wrote that Elizabeth had the posture of a man in women's clothing. These observations, filtered through diplomatic politeness, point to physical characteristics that stood out even in an era of different beauty standards. The story of Elizabeth I's body, then, is ultimately a story about the price of power and the lengths to which individuals and institutions will go to maintain founding myths. The Virgin Queen, who embodied English Protestant virtue, may not have been a virgin, a queen, or even a human being in the conventional sense by the end of her life. The body that symbolized national identity was itself a lie, corrupted and transformed by the very efforts aimed at preserving it. What is sealed in the Westminster Abbey are not simply the remains of a monarch, but evidence of one of history's greatest deceptions. The woman who celebrated her victory over the Spanish Armada may have had a body that was anything but not weak and feeble. And her greatest achievement was not establishing England as a world power, but successfully concealing the truth about her own body for more than 4 centuries. There, in the darkness, the truth about the Virgin Queen waits. Patient and terrible. A secret that remains too dangerous to reveal even today. M.